live. Okay, Ryan.
You're allowing me to.
3, 2, 1. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Social Emotional Learning Summit. I'm Carla Tantillo, the founder of Mindful Practices and the co-founder of the SEL Check-In, Check-In Out platform, Class Catalyst. And with me is the fabulous
Ryan Nevis, Illinois ASCD Executive Director. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome for the first time to some of you. We picked up a handful of new friends yesterday and overnight. So we are excited to be here for the last day of the summit. It's crazy to think that it's almost over.
Yes, and we're so excited because we had feedback from so many of you, from classroom teachers, from paraprofessionals, from administrators, from counselors, from social workers. And today we continue these conversations, these critical conversations around SEL, anti-racism, trauma, and healing practices, amplifying both student and school stakeholder voices to create resilient spaces. And our keynote speaker is truly an expert in this, so I'm so excited to welcome him in a few. We are deeply, deeply grateful and welcome any feelings into this space. We want to make sure that there's equity of voice and that we all feel comfortable sharing. An integral foundation of social emotional learning is cultivating a space in which feelings can be acknowledged, validated, and transformed, ultimately to create environments where feelings are both welcomed and supported equally. We did this on day 1. We engaged in critical conversations around tough topics. Let's do this again in day 2, everyone. Again, I want to take a moment to reiterate that everyone is a learner here. Right? We're all on this journey together. No one is an expert in teaching in a pandemic because none of us have done it before. And so we're all wearing our learner hats. We're all coming to this space with grace and curiosity. I encourage you to ask questions, share your perspectives, build community with each other, with our panelists. I heard that folks were texting each other after sessions yesterday. The panelists were getting tweeted. We love that. We love that because that's really what Ryan and I had in mind when we were putting the summit together. I assure you that our panelists and our Mindful Practices and Illinois ASCD teams, we're going to be doing the same on our end. We're going to be wearing that reflective hat as well, because these are the conversations that matter. These are the conversations that matter. And it is only through authentic conversations and actions that we are able to facilitate positive changes for our school communities, positive changes that I know that we all want when we look ahead. When we look back, we say, you know what, in education, we could have done things better. Wow, we were really missing student voice. We were really missing voices of stakeholders across the school building. Wow, there are some things that we need to do better. And you know what, friends? This is our moment. This is our call to action. This is our time to shine. Thank you for being here. We value you and we value your commitment to this engaging work. I'm looking forward to learning alongside of you today with our first keynote speaker, my personal friend, and amazing sessions throughout the day. We've also made sure to emphasize on day 2, ESL and bilingual education. You'll hear from speakers like Marisol and Valerie Boutron, who are going to be sharing amazing insights, as well as Jeff Munch in his work with students in California. Please keep, as we enter day 2, your own well-being needs in mind as well. We had the well-being day for many of us, then we had day 1 of the summit, an intense schedule, so much learning happening. Day 2, a ton of learning as well. And so if you need a minute, friends, take a minute. Have that extra cup of tea, do a quick yoga pose, go stand out in the sun for a moment. We want to make sure that your well-being needs are met during this time. Kick back in those comfy clothes, grab your favorite snack, grab a notebook, jot down new ideas, solutions, share with a colleague. Take the time you need, and as always, make sure you take a screen break too. Please reach out to me or Ryan personally. In your welcome email, you see our emails at the bottom of the page, as well as Ryan will be sharing information on how to view recordings. So you can share this wonderful, valuable information again with each other, with your colleagues, with thought partners. We are at your service today. We want you to walk out of this summit, or tune out of this summit, I should say, with having a positive experience. It's more important now than ever that you feel supported. So there's no request, friends, too little or too big. You need tech troubleshooting, you need help. We are here to support you. In fact, Ryan and I see it as our job. Enjoy day 2. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for being on this journey with us and for sharing. We so appreciate you. Now, Ryan, I know you have some housekeeping tips for all of us. Tell me.
You got it, Carla. Beautifully said, by the way. And it is our privilege to be here to support all of you. I'm going to keep my comments brief because I want to give our keynote as much time as possible to try to tackle this important topic in just a few short moments. 3 tips for success. Most of us are probably seasoned pros by now, but there are a few new friends here today. Let your session guide kind of be your go-to document throughout the day. I would suggest bookmarking it, keeping it up on a separate window. This is going to allow you to seamlessly move between breakout sessions just with that 5-minute passing period. Occasionally in this digital realm, we do all get disconnected. So if you happen to get out of a session for whatever reason, you can jump right back in using that session guide with the original link. Seamless transition back into the presentation. Number 2, as Carla mentioned, our staff is here to help. You can't see us, but I promise you, we are behind the scenes trying to find the blind spots before you do. Type your questions, comments, concerns into the chat box in your actual sessions. I'm going to drop a handful of staff emails into this chat box here momentarily. Feel free to reach out any way you can. We are here to help. And third and final, Carla mentioned a thank you email at the end of the day. That's going to have some important pieces of information you don't want to miss. Probably the biggest question that we've had the last couple of days is how do we access all these fabulous session recordings? And we love getting that question. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you a step-by-step guide of instructions that you can be able to use and access that. Also, evaluations. And I would ask the group today, even if you're not going to take your professional development credit hours, if you don't mind filling out that eval for us, we've added some questions on there that's going to give us some data and feedback to help us improve this conference for years to come. So you follow these simple steps, you sit back, do a couple mindfulness exercises throughout the day, do some stretching, you're going to have a phenomenal experience. Carla, my friend, back to you.
Thank you, Ryan. So now is the time we have all been waiting for. It is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. He was so fabulous last year that Ryan and I begged him to come back again this year. And friends, I want to just paint a quick picture. If you don't know Dr. Swinney, he is one of those people that, and I'm sure you have friends like this, when you're around this friend or you get them on the phone, because you know that time is precious with them, that you have just diarrhea of the mouth. When we were just checking audio and everything, I was like, oh, and then I have this to talk to you about, and then I have this to talk to you about, and I can't wait to talk to you about this, because Dr. Swinney, from the moment I met him, is one of those people who you just want their advice. You want to hear their thoughts on the world. You want to hear their thoughts on education because there's such wisdom. There's such reflection. He has been an amazing friend to me. He's been an amazing friend to my organization, Mindful Practices. And a story that I always love to share is, this work, mindfulness in schools and social emotional learning, while it might be in vogue now, it wasn't always, and especially wasn't always in high schools or in middle schools. And I remember that Maurice was getting some flack. He was like, the people like, oh yeah, you don't need that mindful practices in your school. You don't need that. And he was like, yes, I do. And he really advocated for that work before it was popular. He has been that friend for me during the pandemic when I'm just feeling anxious. I have needed to text somebody. I have needed answers about what's going on in this third largest school district that we're serving. He is that person that will take your text at 9:30 at night and say, hey, I gotcha. It's going to be okay. He is an amazing friend. He is an amazing advocate for students. I am so grateful that he is with us today. Dr. Swinney, thank you, my friend. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And hello and good morning to every single person who's sharing space with us today. It's always an honor for me, honestly, when I get the opportunity to talk with educators and to share space with people who are deeply committed to transforming schools. An overarching goal of mine is if we transform the student experience in schools, we can transform the outcome. And we know that schools is a core place where many people get together for hundreds of days at a time to have hundreds of interactions. The only place like schools where you have so many people constantly convening for years at a time are prisons and nursing homes. Those are the closest social institutions where you have such a large gathering that's recurring. And so the time and investment that we have to put in schools, the labor of love that we have to center on is pretty important for each of us. And so just thank you this morning. You know, I'm also a texter, so the 9:30 texts are fine. I even have my phone available in case I need to receive a text from our team here in case we need to figure out something or work on something. So thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm going to share my screen with you all. And I'm going to present. So if you can see my screen, I also do open facilitation with Zoom. So if something happens, I try to glance at the chat to see what's happening in the chat. But if you all could just please drop in the chat if you can see my screen. I'm just double checking with the team to make sure that we're all set up and we're all good to go. While we do that, I want to take a moment and pause and just honor a civil rights legend, John Lewis. We thank him for his years of service. He says, you must find a way to get in the way and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. You have a moral obligation and a mission and a mandate when you leave here to go out and seek justice. You can do it, you must do it. So let's just take a moment of silence for a few seconds and just appreciate the work and the life of U.S. Representative John R. Lewis. So thank you, my friends. I am extremely thankful and grateful to be here with you all this morning. Like I said, just a little bit about myself. I'm a former high school principal here in Chicago. I'm entering, I think this is my 20th year in education. I was a teacher, an English teacher. I taught math for a year, long story. I was also an instructional coach and assistant principal. And then I was a 9th grade principal in a large high school. I'm originally from Louisiana, New Orleans. And then I moved to Chicago in 2012 because I wanted to be a principal in a larger city. And so Tilden chose me and I chose it. And I really believe that my deeper understanding of equity comes from that experience. So this book called The Make or Break Year was written by Emily Crone Phillips, and she captures a lot about my principalship experience that when I look back at the stories and the journey, I realized how critical it is for educators to be equipped, how important it is for educators to be deeply reflective about the work. And so I hope that you experience me this morning as a person who will be vulnerable. I will share some stories, but I also want to create space for us within this community. So we will use the chat function as a way of communicating. There are different points I will ask you to journal. I will ask you to stop and pause. I will ask you to reflect. And then there are times I'm going to push us more into some deeper learning around what it means to do equity work and anti-racist work in schools. So here's my equity team. My team is phenomenal. I really appreciate the work and the way that they show up in these spaces every day. So thank you to my team. And the purpose of the Office of Equity in CPS, or the mission, is to develop, support, implement, and report on district efforts to eliminate the opportunity gaps in education quality, policies and supports for students and adults. And we say students and adults because we believe that adult practices are the things that shift in order to improve student experience. And so a part of our core value and mission is to support adults in this work. Here is our equity framework theory of action. We're going to spend time this morning in liberatory thinking, but I want you to look at the backdrop that says targeted universalism. What that essentially means is we need to ensure that we are working in schools and in policy and at the state and federal level. Everybody is accountable for all of this work to get all of our student groups, all of our young people to graduation and beyond. That is one of the large purposes of public education. And so with that, we say we have to think about what are the targeted approaches for each particular group to achieve the goals that we're trying to achieve. If we can get clear on what those goals are, and when we mean by goals, we're not talking about achievement gaps and opportunity gaps. We're talking about what does it mean for each group of young people to get to the thing that we actually want for them. And so one of the reasons why we in the Office of Equity move away from gap language as much as possible is because we don't always want results to be compared to white students or to whiteness. And we have to disrupt the way in which we think about how do we close a gap to get some students to perform like others, but really, how do we get all students to these large and lofty goals? And the needs of different students and student groups by race, by gender identity or expression, by accessibility or disability, we have to consider all of those different needs, LGBTQ status, all of that, right? How do we actually get all of our beautiful, wonderful young people to those goals? And we say we have to apply an equity lens. In this case, this morning, we're specifically going to talk about liberatory thinking. But before we get into all that, I want us to slow down for a moment and think about self-care. One of the ways to enter into this work, this really tough, grimy, messy work around equity, is to take care of self. Audre Lorde says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. We are only as good to the work if we really understand who we are as human beings. How am I showing up? And we're going to explore the work of identity this morning, the work of relationships, and the work of history. So I want us to breathe together for a little while. And I want you to notice the moving gift, and I want you to follow it. So it's inhaling and then exhaling. We'll do this about 4 to 5 times. So what I would like each of you to do is inhale, exhale. Notice your breath. Inhale. Again, inhale. Two more times. Inhale. Last time. Thank you for slowing down to move fast. I want you to look at a part of what we call the liberatory thinking tool in Chicago Public Schools. And the first part of the liberatory thinking work, which is about mindset, which is about transformation, which is about understanding identity, which is about how do I show up in relationship to other people. We actually start with self-care on this tool, asking ourselves 5 simple questions. First, am I getting enough sleep? Second, am I getting enough medical care when needed? So when I notice feelings, when I notice bumps or anything on my body, when I notice bruises, when I notice little funny like thumps, how am I taking care of myself? Am I using preventative health care, which could be anything from like diet, food regulation. It can be anything from like working out. It could be chiropractor. It could be regular checkups. And then number 4, like, How am I noticing my inner experience? How often am I sort of sitting back thinking about my thoughts, observing my thoughts and beliefs? And then finally, am I spending time with people I enjoy, people who I really like to be around? So we asked, just for a moment, I want you just to score your own self wherever you are in the journal that Carla talked about earlier. Is this an area that I'm ready to learn? Am I learning, or am I delivering? So just take 1 minute. So as you are just making these notes, it's an opportunity to think about, as we prepare to enter school soon, as we think about the work that we have to do with our colleagues, with our own families, and all the things we have to manage, how do you need to put yourself first in order to be of great service to this work? So I want you to look ahead for a moment. I want you to think about the journey that you have to embark on. And just think about today's path. So when we talk about equity in Chicago Public Schools, or when we talk about equity more broadly, we hold truth that equity is about mirror and windows. How often am I holding up the mirror to myself to understand my own beliefs, my own identities, experiences, insights? What am I really good at? What am I strong at? What are my fears? And the opposite side of that is windows, thinking about what ways do I need to further understand context? How do I need to think about my students? What insights do I learn from them? So we say it's a joint effort of windows and mirrors. We also believe that you have to approach this work using the CPS equity curve. Curiosity suspends judgment. Urgency recognizes the timely nature of this work. Resiliency is about knowing and feeling the pressure to move forward and to stay strong in it, and knowing that we're going to see it to the end, like the path that you saw. Vulnerability says, you know what, I actually don't have all the answers. I'm trying to figure this out, but we can solve it using the collective wisdom. And empathy is about how I connect to other people's stories. So I want you to choose the word that resonates with you. And I would like, if you can, to drop that word in the chat, and let's see what people are thinking, experiencing right now. Just drop your word in the chat for us. So the curve is about the inner work, the mirror work. I want you to take a look at these norms and think about, here are the norms for our space. Sorry about that, pressed the wrong button. So the norms for our space, we believe, speak your truth. Knowing that your truth might change in 5 minutes, it happens, but that you feel comfortable with saying the thing. Experiences comfort. Sometimes we're on the other side of a person's truth. And when we're talking about race and equity, it can be really difficult. It can be hard. It can be grueling at times. Contextual confidentiality says that the stories that we talk about stay in, but the strategies go out, so that we respect people's vulnerability and ensuring that we're not weaponizing the stories that we hear. And then finally, expect and accept non-closure, which is anchoring in the space of, we won't solve it all today, especially in this session, but we will have some ways in which we can move the work forward. So the purpose of our time, ladies and gentlemen, is to strengthen relationships during the current racial pandemic and global crisis, while educating peers on how to be an anti-racist ally. So what are our human motivations that will drive us in this work? The second goal is to create space and time for members of this SEL ASCD community to intentionally process by holding up the mirror to get some further insights, and also to have conversations about anti-Blackness and racism, the global health crisis, and even teleworking from home. We as educators are holding space for all of that, and we would be crazy to not act like it can be painful at times, and that we're now allowing people access into our sort of private spaces. And then finally, I'm hoping that you get equipped with at least two strategies or two tools that can help you to advance this work. So I want you to look at the image on, it's my right, so it's probably your left, I don't know. I have to now, I'm not standing in front of a PowerPoint, so it's a little different. But look at the image where it says your plan versus reality. So guess what? You're planning lessons, you're figuring things out. You're going to have all of these beautiful things, and then reality is going to set in, and you're going to be like, how am I actually going to get to accomplish the goals and things that I really, really want to do? And so what I offer you this morning is just to embrace it. Equity leaders embrace the complexity of the work. You might have times where it feels a little sad, you feel a little down, but I want you to embrace complexity. It's going to get messy. Everybody in the world is going through this right now. Everybody. So think about that. There are no perfect solutions. And complexity means that sometimes we don't even know all of the unknowns in order to fully solve something. So I offer you that as an opportunity to inhale and exhale and to avoid the work of perfection, but really think about how do we design and how do we use process to improve our work. So notice we spent some time this morning really thinking about the work of the human being, that it is important that you anchor yourself within yourself in order to move this work forward. So I want to push into the work of anti-racism. And anti-racist, as Dr. Kendi defines, is one who is expressing the idea that racial groups are equal and none needs developing, and is supporting policies that reduce racial inequities. Being an anti-racist requires persistent self-awareness, constant self-criticism, and regular self-examination. So a little bit of what we did earlier helps to anchor us and set us up to go into or to improve or to advance anti-racist work. So a part of that journey is to acknowledge the current situation and to affirm those most impacted. In the Office of Equity, we say and we hold true that Black Lives Matter. We support the honoring and the policy transformation and the love of Black people in this work. James Baldwin says people are trapped in history and history is trapped in them. This picture comes from the New Yorker, which gives a chronology of 400 years of the journey of Black people within America. And so today we honor and remember their histories. When you go back to your schools, people are going to ask you, what's your stance? What do you believe? What do you hold fast to? And we have to make sure that we're always pushing the ideas that really bring liberation for all people. And so that is why we hold up to liberatory thinking. And so we've seen people across the world show up. It's been a beautiful time, even as we deal with pain, to see how people are showing up in support. And this has been happening all around the world. We also know that we're in the middle of a global health pandemic. This picture that you see on the screen was taken in March. It has been exacerbated. It has grown, the impact of COVID-19 on people all over the world. And we see America has the highest death rate and the highest virus contact rate in the world. And so please stay safe. Please keep your family safe. Wear your masks so that people can see you the next day and still be connected to you. And we ask that you limit social contact. You know, I always say, have a Zoom party, meet your friends on Zoom. So take a look at this quote. So right now we're trying to imagine a new world. If equity was fully fleshed out and fully delivering in our spaces, we would be in a very different place within our country before the pandemic, but we're not. And so now we have an opportunity to have a radical imagination about what this work means. So I want you to take a moment. I want you to look at these questions. I'm going to play a little music. I want you to stay in this mirror space because I want to make sure by the end of the session, you are powerful, you're thoughtful, you're ready to take on some challenges. But I want you to answer this one question for yourself. What are you noticing about how you are experiencing this pandemic and racial injustice, and what feelings are coming up for you? I'm just going to play music for a second, and I'm just going to give you 1 quick minute to you can write down some quick words, write down a sentence or two, and then I'll come back and move us along. Okay, my alarm went off. Now, normally I would provide more time, and then afterward I would send you into breakout sessions. So the way in which we've constructed this is to, you'll get access to this information, FYI. You'll get a link so that you can take the learning and see if you can use some of it to transform the practices where you are. But notice a lot of this that we're talking about first is about self. A lot of times in education, we think about what's the thing that we do? How do I sort of implement a culturally responsive education strategy? How do I think about having young people talk to each other about math problems? All of those things are extremely important. But the most powerful person, the most powerful strategy is a person who knows who they are and knows how to show up as an ally and is extremely mindful about the things that people have experienced and the work ahead. So here are some questions that you can use at another time. So I want to take a little moment, this just to give you some facilitator moves. Afterward, like I said, you would have an opportunity to socialize what you learn and Zoom breakout rooms. So if you want to do that, if you want to take some of this content, please do that. And it will be a constructivist listening opportunity where we say, I agree to listen to you and think about you in exchange for you doing the same for me. So giving each person an opportunity just to verbally reflect, not commenting, thinking about, do I agree or disagree, but just allowing space for conversation. So those are just a few facilitator moves. So I want to shift us a little bit to think about core belief. And that here's what we believe: creating more and just liberating systems is possible. So having young Black and brown children to do exceptionally well in schools is possible. Bettina Love pushes us on abolitionist teaching. There are ways in which we can do the culturally responsive education work within our system. It's definitely possible. But in order to do that, we have to change the discourse in schools. So I have an article embedded in the PowerPoint that I'm just going to briefly talk through. A lot of times the actions that I talked about, so we're doing all these things in schools, we're applying these strategies, we're using lots of tools and gadgets, and all of those things are important. The deeper question is, what are the assumptions and beliefs that we have about young people who we serve, about the teachers in our building, about the people who work across the hall? How do we think about all of those elements in order to change the conversation, in order to have different outputs, different actions? So in liberatory thinking, which is about getting deeply in the mind, in the CPS equity framework, we say we have to engage in deep reflection to understand bias, identities, and personal stories. And we have to engage in courageous conversations. We have to shift from talking about the achievement gap, which is about disparities in test scores of Black and brown children, in particular to their white counterparts, but really thinking about the history of education and making sure that we equip schools with the resources and time necessary to improve the conditions and the outcomes. This is about taking a deep look at history, understanding the economic context, the social political context, and really working from a moral compass. Gloria Ladson-Billings really does a good job with helping us understand we owe it to many communities in order to do this work with them to improve conditions in schools that we believe will transform the experiences and the outcomes. So discourse one is typical for what we talk about in schools. We're going to create this plan. We know that reform is necessary. We're going to do culturally responsive education, all of that stuff, right? That's the normal discourse. Here's what I want us to think about. Before it was culturally responsive education, it was differentiation. Before that, it was multicultural education. Before that, it was multiple intelligence. Why is it that all of these sort of themes and frames constantly come up and in some way spin with a new name? Now, I do believe culturally responsive education is slightly different. The larger question is, what is the conversation that we have to have in schools in order to get to the real outcomes that we want? So discourse two is about the language that tends to be uncomfortable, uneven. It talks about the prejudicial conditions in schools. We even had some teachers to use the equity framework, for example. And one teacher had a reflection. She says, as I think about this, I'm thinking about who gets to pass out the paper in the classroom and who doesn't. It's a really deep question. And she was thinking about which students in her class are receiving the most behavioral consequences and why. And a part of that, she recognized who she was prioritizing in her space and who she was thinking about deserves to do certain things. And she started to disrupt her own beliefs. When there is no conversations, we know explicit bias happens. When we call kids at risk, and when we call them failures, and when we use dehumanizing language. That's worse than discourse 1. Discourse 0 is like, we're very explicit, saying, I don't know why your parents don't do this. And the real discriminatory language and racist language that sometimes comes out of adults' mouths is because we're not actually having discourse. So if we're having 0 discourse, we got to think about going from 0 to discourse 2. I'm going to skip through this just for a moment, but like discourse 1 looks at the symptoms, discourse 2 looks at the causes. Discourse 1 think about competencies, discourse 2 thinks about relevance. Discourse 2 centers what's familiar, like how do we keep talking about the same thing, and it doesn't require us to feel a level of discomfort that discourse 2 has. In discourse 1, we talk about students dropping out of schools. In discourse 2, we talk about pushing students out of schools. So how do we begin to look at data and have discourse 2 conversations in school? That's a critical part of that. And here are some of the questions that you will have to say for a later time. The discourse, the Change in the Discourse article is here. We actually ask that people read it. You can do many protocols with it, but to sort of wrap people's brain around what does it mean to have discourse 2. So I want to spend some time pushing into disrupting anti-Blackness in particular and think about how to be anti-racist. So I want us to watch this 3-minute video. This is Greg Peters. He is a part of the San Francisco Coalition for Small Schools. He has done work around equity across the country. He's one of the leaders whose work I truly admire. And I want him to help us to think about liberatory thinking, discourse 2, and how do I need to show up mindfully in the spaces that I'm in. Let's listen in on his reflection.
To do some work. And the work we're going to do is we're going to explore a little bit about who we are and the skin we're in so we can understand how we show up. I want to actually, just to make meaning of this, share how I might answer that question. Like when I show up, people see me and they see a white, bald, guy of power, guy of positional influence. I sign people's paychecks. All that matters. All that matters. And there's other stuff about me that people don't see that actually influence very much how I show up. So I'm going to read a little poem I wrote once. I am Gregory Peters. I am the child of parents who prioritized service and respect and family itself. Parents with the wisdom of humility, inquiry, and critical consciousness. I am of a family whose education reaches back to the lineage of our ancestors and culture, and who collectively defines and measures intelligence not solely through our brains, but also our hearts and passions and hands. I am an American of proud Lebanese and Italian heritage. I grew up on food stamps. I am married. I have been married 4 times to the same man. I am queer at a time when my queer students are still dying by their own and others' hands and influence everywhere. So I'm a very complex person. I'm not just this white guy. The skin I'm in is so much more than the skin you see, and yet the skin you see is so much of who I am. For in the context of educating our least reached youth, I am still a white man. I offer that so that you can understand, like, this came as a result of sitting in and saying, who am I and how do I show up? So I know my passions, my experiences show up with me. And I know when I'm not consciously reflecting and aware of that, I have been trained as such a piece of this dominant culture that no matter how queer I am, no matter how poor I was, no matter how brown some of my family is, when I'm unaware, I know that I will use my white privilege to make me comfortable. And that happened in my classroom. It happened with me as an administrator. It happens with me every single day. And so my work has to be constant. So that comes from just doing some work about my schema. So the question is, what's your schema? Part of my schema
So here are some questions as you just think about the complexity of his comments and his thoughts about himself, about the way that he's viewed and understood, his own processing and work. I would normally do a breakout session, but feel free to ask questions in the Q&A section or to drop into the chat, because I'll move to that in a few minutes. But in the skin you are in, how are you showing up and perpetuate or interrupt the inequitable experiences or the inequities experienced by our least reached students? Not the students who do exceptionally well according to the standard way of we measure progress, but how are we showing up for the ones who we haven't reached yet? The second question is, what is your stance? What are you holding to? What are you grounded in? What's your moral, ethical compass for doing this work? And what gives you hope? Now, if you were in a session with me, I would actually sit down, create space to give you time for journaling, processing, talking with some colleagues, because this is the strategy to be anti-racist or to improve schools. I can give you a list of things to do, but if we are not centered in the way, recognizing the historical experiences of different groups in America, particularly Black people in this case, because I'm going to move to that for a few minutes to talk about anti-Blackness. If we are not really deeply anchored in that, no strategy, or I will say limited strategies, will work in service to the people we're working with. Even I, as a Black man, have to think about colorism and how do I show up and how do I make sure that I'm not using the brown paper bag test where darker skinned students are receiving more consequence than lighter skinned students. We've seen that happen. Think about whatever your context is. If you're a principal working with teachers, if you were to start to think about the teachers you have great relationships with and the ones you don't, what do they have in common? What are your beliefs about them? How do we do that analytical work to do the unpacking that's necessary? Every one of us has a schema, and we must interrogate that. And we must think about and interrupt the ways in which we see and do and act in order to deeply engage in equity work. Here are some questions in the Liberatory thinking tool that you'll have access to when we talk about identity. 4 things. I can communicate an understanding of my identity and intersectionality. Number 2, I understand how my social identities affect how I work. Number 3, I can name current racial inequities in my community or in the country. And number 4, I am able to recognize how I expressed internalized racial superiority or internalized racial inferiority. And we define those on the tool. All of this is to help us recognize that we are the core part of the strategy of transforming the student experience in school and making sure that all of our young people graduate with opportunity. Here is a definition by Dr. Cesare Warren, who talks about anti-Blackness. And he talks about anti-Blackness as rendering of Black bodies as inhumane, disposable, inherently problematic, or endures in the organizational arrangement of cultural ethos. Now, Cesare also is an important friend of mine. What he essentially says is that anti-Blackness has roots in history. So look at just these words alone, how it shows up: Black sheep, Black death, Black male, blackout, Black market. The word Black itself is associated with bad. And so each of us has been collecting all of this knowledge and learning for years. And how do we begin to slow down to interrupt that? It's kind of like when Michael Jackson made us think the term bad is good, when he would say, who's bad? And like spinning and helping to disrupt the way in which we see words and understand words. And so we have to do the same thing with the word Black, that Black is beautiful and that it's loving and that it cannot and it should not be associated with all things bad. And so we all have to interrupt that. Now we have about, I think 9 to 10 minutes. There's another video that I actually want you to watch, but I'm going to save this video. Carla, if you could just give me a time check to make sure that I give some time for Q&A. But this video, I'm just going to frame it for you and maybe you can watch it later. The video is by Kimberly Jones. This video has been seen across the world. Trevor Noah has retweeted it, Madonna, Oprah, so many other people who, what she does is she does a beautiful job with capturing Black history using the game of Monopoly to help people understand the Black economic conditions. And she talks about all of the crazy things that have happened within America to give a greater frame on the experiences. I really want you to watch this video. It has some expletives in it. I would not show it to people unless I frame it first, if you were to do it in school, but it's a great video and it really captures in 7 minutes people's thinking. And it's called How Can We Win? And so the questions that I would ask are here, you'll get this PowerPoint. And so the question is, what's next? Like, how do I continue on this journey? Number one, if I were to reflect back, you have to be introspective. You are the core part of the strategy needed in your school, in your classroom, in your building. And people need to see you as that person who is deeply reflective in the mirror and understanding the window work, which is about learning about other people's experiences and gaining those insights. And we say in order to disrupt our anti-racist practices, these are what are called liberatory design cards created by Stanford and the National Equity Project. And we did a little bit of these later. You'll have access to what these are. And this is about process and about change, not about just delivering a strategy, right? Like, for example, practicing self-awareness is an anti-racist act. Am I aware of how I'm showing up in these spaces? That I focus on human values. How do I make sure that this work is always human-centered? That I attend to other people's healing in my school. Do certain students in your building or in your classroom or in your neighborhood or community or in your life have a different experience? And how do we think about that? How do we wrestle with that? So I want you to take some time just to look back when you get the link to the presentation to think about what are the liberatory design pieces that I need to do? And how do I start to engage in this liberatory thinking in order to do the transformative work so that when school officially starts or as school is progressing, I am getting better with understanding who I am in relation to other people so that every child who is impacted by me, every single adult who is engaging in me is seeing that I am on an anti-racist journey and they are more than willing to join me in a very deep, mindful, and heartfelt way. So with that, I will now transfer it back over to Carla, or if she has certain questions that I could respond to, we can go from there. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this time.
Can we, audience, everybody, let's give Dr. Swinney an amazing round of applause. That was so inspiring. I have so many notes. One of the things that jumped out for me was your call to action to all of us, right? Around being present, around self-care. And I love that last slide about share, don't sell. It's not about, right, selling my stance. It's about being a listener. Yeah. And so my question for you, and this is a question that came in, but as a 43-year-old, 44-year-old white woman, how should I be an ally? How should I be starting or continuing on this anti-racist journey?
Yeah, I think one of the important elements, so like using Greg Peters as an example, he was able to say, I am more than this and I am this, right? And it is important for white people in this case to think about, even though I am an ally, when people see me around in different spaces, they see a white woman. And what does that mean? And then how might she step up for other people in spaces? So in a classroom setting, it could be giving young people the opportunity to share their stories. It can be using culturally responsive text. It can be going to other teachers or colleagues to say, I actually think we need to think about how we've been treating this particular student. So pushing people on the ways in which she might engage. But I also think a benefit would be her open reflection about her journey in front of her colleagues, so that people can see, this is how I'm thinking about who I am in my identity, so that people can be pushed into their own brain doing that deep reflective work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when we think about this conversation, is this a conversation that, because I also want to be really sensitive to, and you and I have had conversations around emotional burden, right? Yeah. So when I'm having this conversation, am I having this conversation with other white colleagues because I'm sensitive to the emotional burden that I might be putting on my, so can we explain that or maybe touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, so there's a balance between like white affinity groups and how they can come off, right? We see sometimes that those gatherings can spur out of control, and then people of color like, what are they doing over there? And what is all of that? So to avoid that, I think it is important to go to Black and brown colleagues to say, here is what I'm thinking about. How can I be of support? I've seen you say, I've heard you say. So like to make connections with somebody else's story, like, hey, I've been thinking a lot about how you have been pushing us as a faculty and a staff or a colleague. What do you think my work should be? Mm-hmm. So that sometimes it can feel like a burden or not, but I do think it is worth approaching people of color who you have a relationship with, who you feel like there's some sort of connection with already. That's why it's easy for you and I to have a conversation, because we already had something established. So I wouldn't go to a new person who I don't have a relationship with to start to talk about these issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wish we had another hour with you, Dr. Swinney. And I just want to say, I mean, the chat is blowing up. My phone is blowing up. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing, for being so vulnerable, for being so open. I really, and I know our participants do too, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The link coming soon to everybody, and just like enjoy the journey. And when you get this slide, use the inhale and exhale. So what people don't know is one day Carla was coming to my school, it's probably like 5 years ago, and we were talking about things, and she, I was like, yes, this, and this, and this. And she was like, all right, got it. Let's just take a moment to breathe. And sometimes people need that. And so I wanted to offer that back to you for your support for me as a principal and now as Chief Equity Officer. So thanks for always reminding us to inhale and exhale.
Right back at you, my friend. Thank you. Thank you. We so appreciate you. Yeah. And again, just from the bottom of my heart, gratitude coming through the screen. This is what's hard. In person, we could do a big bear hug. I know. Thank you, friends. Again, one last round of applause for Dr. Swinney. And we have sessions starting at 10 o'clock. We will see you there. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.